How does it feel to be so close to your home, yet you can't reach it? To look towards your dreams, but to know you can never achieve it? What if I told you that this was the truth for thousands of families in New York City after World War II? You wouldn't believe me, would you? In the 1940s, as World War II took the attention of many, the MetLife Company was seeking to continue to make a fortune at the cost of African Americans. Although African Americans had every right to gain access to housing properties nationwide, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company denied African Americans applications to Stuyvesant Town. Stuyvesant v. Dorsey serves as a primary example of MetLife's responsibility to uphold the 14th Amendment, with them being forced to remove their policy of discrimination towards African Americans. The case brought awareness to the issue and helped facilitate the further growth of the Town and Village Tenants Committee to end discrimination in Stuyvesant Town to ensure the problem didn't arise again. Their reach helped influence the development of the Housing Act of 1968 during the Civil Rights Movement. This is the story of how Stuytown beat discrimination.
Throughout the 18th century, New York City was rapidly growing in size. Immigrants in hopes of a better life moved away from their poor European origins to America, New York, Manhattan. These groups started developing themselves in this new world by organizing into cultural enclaves, small little neighborhoods of people from the same region, such as Chinatown and Little Italy. These immigrants began to populate themselves into tenements, where they would live and try and earn their way out of these poor areas. Until they couldn't. As the United States began to go through the Industrial Revolution, areas needed to be created to store the new products and energy sources. The Lower East Side of Manhattan was a victim of this change as gas houses began construction. One area after another became full of gasometers, big structures used to surround an iron gas holder, and they gradually started to push out the same immigrants that filled up the streets of life. Poverty ensued, and local gangs emerged. The area became a wasteland.
For years, the area remained this way. No one dared to try and rebuild until a failing gashouse district would grab the attention of a greedy money-grabbing company in the 1930s. This was MetLife, or also known as the Metropolitan Life Company. World War II was in full swing as hundreds of thousands of young men were being drafted into the U.S. Army and deployed overseas to Europe. MetLife saw this as an economic opportunity and started planning the reconstruction of the gashouse district into a neighborhood called Stuytown. They understood that once the war ended, thousands of veterans would return to America, many of whom would need housing. And with this, all that was needed was an approval from the mayor of New York City for the construction of the project.
Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia faced many critics and held hearings during the Board of Estimate of 1943 in order to come to a conclusion on whether to approve the construction of Stuyvesant Town or not, as he was faced with his most heated racial issue during his time as mayor. Racial discrimination loomed in the shadows as the citizens of New York tried to shine light on the issue and make it clear to LaGuardia that racial discrimination was inevitable under the leadership of the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. The president of MetLife, Frederick Ecker, was quoted for his racist views many times during the hearing, including, "Negroes and white don't mix, perhaps in 100 years, but they don't now." Or, "They, blacks, would depress all the surrounding property." The New York Post quoted Ecker, "Negroes will be excluded."
Despite there being no filter in Frederick Ecker's racial discriminatory intentions, it was still not enough to convince LaGuardia that the housing projects wouldn't benefit the greater good of society and the fight against racism. See, this was also in part due to a man named Moses, part commissioner appointed by LaGuardia. LaGuardia had left all negotiations with MetLife to Moses, who shared many personal opinions with Ecker. This caused Moses to have a huge influence in LaGuardia's decision as he regarded Moses as the best qualified for the assignment. With Moses' influence and LaGuardia's attitude to do nothing about the racial discrimination that was presented to him, MetLife's project for Stuyvesant Town was approved. And hence, as Adam Clayton Powell Jr. once put it in his newspaper The People's Voice, Hitler won a victory in New York City.
Construction for the site began in early 1945. It was deemed the largest superblock ever created. Then, in 1947, construction finished, and the town was prepared for its opening. On just the initial offerings, MetLife received over 7,000 applications to live inside of the town. This number quickly grew to a staggering 100,000 by the time of the neighborhood's opening. And with that, on August 1st, 1947, the first tenants, the family of two different World War II veterans, moved into the town. For the first developing months and years of the town, people moved in and began to start their life without a care in the world. However, issues soon began to arise, and MetLife soon began to abandon their responsibility to house each individual veteran. Ecker's statements made 4 years earlier would be realized. While the No Negroes policy wasn't a concrete law or a legal rule, it was an idea that manifested in the actions the town took against black people, stripping away their rights to purchase housing.
Progressive tenants in the town, some of whom were communist, quickly began to try and protest this. In 1948, Dr. Lee Lorch, a member of the local 65 union, invited an African-American Hendricks family and his neighbors into his apartment. He managed to do this through the agreement of over 1,200 tenant signatures. However, once MetLife caught wind of this, they immediately attempted to evict Lorch and all of his African-American guests. Yet, the community rallied together and helped them barricade themselves into their apartment while protesting Stuytown. MetLife couldn't do anything and eventually gave up. A small victory against discrimination in Stuytown. However, once the dust had settled, Lorch, who had taken responsibility of housing the Hendricks family, suffered massively when it came to his career. As the news of his actions came out to the public, university administration started firing him as they found his actions unacceptable.
It is here we come to the main issue. While MetLife couldn't stop neighbors and family friends from being invited into apartment homes, they did have the power to discriminate against applications for housing in the town. Discontent spread through the African American community as they felt that their rights of being able to apply for housing were being suppressed once again. MetLife, on the other hand, being a private corporation, felt like it wasn't their responsibility to appeal to the public's concerns over the rights that they had been given under the power of the state. This discrepancy on what MetLife could or could not do as a private corporation is what led to a last-ditch effort by a man named Joseph Dorsey.
Dorsey had been looking to rent out an apartment in Stuytown when his request was denied. Then, in April of 1949, he sued Stuyvesant Town and the MetLife Corporation on the grounds stating that they had violated the Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This clause states that no person can be denied protection of any law under the state's jurisdiction. Stuytown rebutted with the fact that MetLife received support from the city to develop the town. They used this to claim that they are just enforcing the city's rules and therefore were not being unconstitutional in their actions. Ironically, they weren't receiving support from their own tenants, as back in 1948, when Lorch was housing the Hendricks family, he conducted a survey on Stuytown's 25,000 tenants and found that 2/3 of them disliked the exclusionary policies in practice. The survey not only included African Americans, but also white citizens as well. All of Ecker's previous points on how African Americans would displease the white citizens' perspective of the town was proven false. The white citizens of Stuytown actually saw that African American exclusion only showed how Ecker was only seeking personal benefit and wanted to exploit this project for its money. Stuytown's argument eventually failed, as Dorsey won the case in a 4-3 majority vote, banning the discriminatory policies in place permanently. Furthermore, before this event had occurred, the Town and Village Tenants Committee to End Discrimination in Stuytown was formed by Lorch while he was fighting against Stuytown's injustices. However, they never had an opportunity to try and fight for their beliefs until Dorsey showed up. The group was a major representation of the black community, showcasing how each and every individual in the town felt it was their responsibility to fight for this cause. As throughout his case, they had supported him and lobbied for his admittance into the town. Their efforts were successful, and it allowed the group to grow, such that by 1950, they were a well-established group which was actively involved in legal and political campaigns against racism in Stuytown.
This brings us to the Civil Rights Movement. Due to the large racist nature of the United States throughout most of the 20th century, the nature of the matter was that anti-racist and anti-discriminatory groups never managed to gain a significant foothold. However, once the Civil Rights Movement eventually came around, the topic of housing discrimination spread through the entire country. These areas looked to the case of Stuytown and the Town and Village Tenants Committee to end discrimination in Stuyvesant Town for inspiration in their own fights against housing segregation and discrimination. This nationwide housing movement led to complete federal change. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act was passed, which firmly established discrimination in housing to be illegal, regardless of private property ownership, such as in Stuytown's case of Dorsey. The Fair Housing Act played a pivotal role beyond this time period in many cases regarding equal representation of families. In 1995, the ACLU of Maryland filed a lawsuit against the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development on Carmen Thompson's behalf and 5 other residents of Baltimore housing units. Thompson versus HUD helped establish the responsibility of communities to promote housing under the Fair Housing Act, supporting thousands of families to move from high poverty, racially isolated neighborhoods. Dorsey's trial helped facilitate the growth of the Town and Village Tenants Committee to end discrimination in Stuyvesant Town and spread awareness over the injustices occurring in Stuytown, blossoming into inspiration for a nationwide movement which called into action the government's responsibility in protecting citizens' rights, ultimately manifesting itself in a law that sought to prevent these issues from happening ever again. Thanks for watching.